Hey, Allison. Good to see you.
You too. Good to see you in person.
Yeah.
How was your trip? Quick. You're in Atlanta, right?
Yeah, it is. And in fact, I'm over here just for
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to come to your sit this morning, but I come down with like head cold and I had to go find lozenges and herbs and tea and
a lot of people are. In fact, I was going to look for. You haven't had anything?
I do have some like
Let me see if I got
zinc
here.
elderberry lozenges if you want one of those.
Yeah, just need
You're welcome to talk on
I don't need lozenges. You have Kleenex.
No, I don't. Do you want me to
Me
find
neither,
some?
no.
No?
I got one piece, maybe that.
We can go see if there's a bathroom
Look
somewhere.
at you.
Yeah, I think I need ginger and other things.
So we had a bigger group at the sit this morning than for this, but let me go ahead and get this started. I will treat this as an audition. I have changed it around
Okay.
a little bit. It will be a pretty thorough introduction to mindfulness. Are you a meditator?
No, not at all.
Oh, great.
Never. I've done self-reflection before, nothing of it. So I don't know. I had a profession before I came to law school. So
What were you?
I was actually a professional jockey.
Ah, interesting.
So yeah, so I had some self-reflection time over the course of many years. So
And many injuries?
many injuries.
Yes.
That gives you time to self-reflect.
Yeah.
So yes. So,
I'm a big Dick Francis fan.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've read a lot of his books.
He writes detective crime novels. The
Okay.
hero is a jockey.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, my mother has read every one of them. And reported back to me. So.
Well, I'm Charity Scott. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Good to see you, Allison. I wish that I could go to the What Makes Lawyers Happy. You know?
I wish we had the same thing.
But I heard that these are all being taped anyway. So
Yeah.
so we can do it later. So you can tell me what works here because I'm actually giving some background into the biology of mindfulness is an effective way to reduce the stress response. So let me see if I can get this to work. So let's do a quick breathing exercise just to get grounded. This is the 4-7-8. It's typical. It's a practice that I give my students for when they freak out in the middle of their exam. You know, just here, take a breath. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, we're going to inhale to the count of 4. We're going to hold that breath for the count of 7. And then as we exhale, we're going to count to 8. And then we're going to do this a few times just to sort of get the feel of it. Okay, so inhale to the count of 4. Hold it for 7. Exhale to the count of 8. Inhale, count of 4. Hold it for 7. Exhale to count of 8. One more. Inhale, count of 4. Hold it for 7. Exhale to the count of 8. So any kind of deep breathing exercise is going to engage the parasympathetic nervous system, which we'll talk about why that works and why that helps to relax you in moments of stress. All right, so mindfulness, for those of all the hundreds of books out there. But I'm going to focus on what the Path to Lawyer Wellbeing says about mindfulness. And this is going to, I'm going to keep coming back to this because I want to emphasize what mindfulness does for the things that are highlighted in red. There's research to support each of these things, but it enhances resilience. Okay, while reducing rumination, that's the loop in your head that keeps going over and over and over. Stress, depression, and anxiety, we and our students particularly very high on the anxiety and depression scales these days. But it's not just about mental health. It's also about enhancing lawyer competencies like increasing focus, working memory, critical cognitive skills, and ethical and rational decision making, all of which highly relevant to externship programs. All right, so here's what I'm going to talk about: what mindfulness is and what it isn't, the benefits, the science that supports it, and here's where I'm doing my auditioning here. See if this works here, because I think that it sometimes helps skeptical lawyers to appreciate it. I'm going to sprinkle some guided meditations throughout. Little exercises just to give you a flavor for what it feels like, particularly those of you who haven't meditated before. Jessica, have you meditated before?
I have.
And then finally, the relevance of all of this for externship programs in enhancing physical and mental well-being and building the capacity for self-awareness. All right, so what is mindfulness? First, I do need to say what it's not. It's not about making your mind blank of all thoughts. A lot of people say, I can't meditate because my mind's just too much of a, jumping around too much. There's a new program out by Dan Harris, who wrote 10% Happier, book about his exploration of mindfulness. And he does mindfulness for fidgety skeptics. I think that's probably a good characterization of lawyers. Fidgety
Have you read
skeptics.
that book?
But I haven't read it yet. It's not about escaping from the real world. It's not about getting disengaged. Quite the contrary. It's about becoming more present in the world. It's not about being brainwashed or getting high or whipped over the toes, any of this. And I want to make it clear at the outset, it's not a substitute for mental therapy. That is, if mental illness does need to be addressed, that's a separate journey. So mindfulness, I'm taking the definition from John Kabat-Zinn, who's the original creator of mindfulness-based stress reduction from the University of Massachusetts Medical Center, which he started this whole Western secularization of mindfulness back in the 1970s. And he defines it as mindfulness is awareness cultivated by paying attention and sustained in a particular way on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. Those are the three. We're going to be lawyerly here. We got to parse those terms. Okay? What does it mean, on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally? Because this is so antithetical to the way our natural minds work. We don't naturally, necessarily, most of the time, pay attention in a sustained way on purpose. Certainly not in the present moment. And certainly not judgmentally. Our inner critics are happily at work all the time. So let's look at this a little bit. All right, this is our typical monkey mind, as it's called in the field, which is why a lot of people say, I can't meditate, my mind's just too active all the time. And we call that the monkey mind. It's jumping from thought to thought to thought to thought to thought to thought all the time. We're perpetually distracted as a natural state, but these weapons don't help us either. All right, they leave us and most particularly our students in a perpetually distracted state. Distraction is kind of bad for your health. Distraction actually results in stress and anxiety. If we live, we can never get focused. Have you heard of the word flow? Kind of getting in the flow and getting absorbed in something. We're happiest when we're actually in the flow, in the moment. We're not so much when we're perpetually distracted, and our stress and anxiety can lead to physical ramifications like backaches and headaches and stomach aches. And the problem with the lack of focused attention, it gets us even more frustrated. So have you ever sat before a video screen or a book, and realized after 15 minutes you haven't read a single word? Yeah, that's what it's like, because other things are going on. You actually aren't paying attention right now. And that can be really frustrating. And if it's frustrating, it leads to more stress and more anxiety, and the cycle repeats itself. So mindlessness is the opposite of mindfulness, and distraction is a real mental and physical health bummer, so to speak. So this is our brain on distraction. This is our brain on focus, and we're actually much happier when our brain is seeing things this way than seeing things that way. All right, so what does it mean to be in the present moment? Another mental trap, not just distractions, but another mental trap that we fall into all the time is time travel. So we spend more of our time ruminating about the past, thinking about what we're going to do in the future, than we actually do in the present moment. We spend a lot of time regretting the things that we did in the past, or probably that were done to us, in our perception, in the past, and we keep reliving those over and over. Can't change them, but we keep reliving them. We start fretting or fearing things that might arise in the future. The future's not here yet, but that doesn't stop us thinking about them. Too much thinking about the past can lead us down the spiral to depression. Too much thinking and fearing the future can lead us to anxiety. It's hard to get us to focus in the present moment, but mindfulness helps us to do that. So this is the typical mindfulness cartoon. Now we appreciate the humor. What do we want? We want it now? Okay, all right. So what's so great?
I'm so sorry.
No problem. What's so great about the present? Well, it's actually the only time we have to live. You know, because while we might say we live in the past or, you know, looking forward to the future, we're actually only living for right now. You know, so if you're never in the present, you're kind of missing it. That's what's so great about the present. All right, this is one of the hardest things to do, is to engage non-judgmentally. If our minds are constantly in a whirlwind of thoughts triggered by emotions, what are the kinds of thoughts that we have? They tend to be judgments about everything. How do you all like the temperature in this room? Is it too hot? I don't know, I think it's too hot. Or you think it's too cold?
I'm cold.
You're cold.
Is this
Okay,
a-
yeah,
is this a real question?
it's never right. You know, we've always got a judgment about, you know, whatever it is, right? We're always making comparisons, and we're particularly always making social comparisons. And they might be negative, might be positive. And we get really attached to all the stories. The stories, mostly what's going on up here is an I, me, and mine story, a narrative that we have in our heads about the things that are important to us, because after all, we're the heroes and heroines of our own narratives, everybody else's. You all are playing a supporting role in my narrative, right? But the same is true for everybody else, right? So we get attached to the stories that we tell ourselves. Hard to let go of those because they give us our identity. But for those with a strong inner critic, those stories tend to be negative. And attorneys in general are prone to negative thoughts, emotions, physical reactions. That is, they're just, you know, hired to scan the horizon for risks and threats that might be out there. Now, I want to stress that mindfulness isn't getting rid of judgments. It's not getting, as I said before, getting rid of thoughts. That's impossible. We're gonna have them. Mindfulness is about changing our relationship to the thoughts, beliefs, opinions, emotions that we have. That is, to providing a little distance to allow us to observe them and not get caught up in them. So, mindfulness as the antidote to the distracted, wandering mind. Mindfulness training is training to become aware of the thoughts we have, the emotions that we have, the physical sensations that we have, without obsessing about them, without getting lost in them, without repeating them over and over again, just being aware of them. once you start to increase the awareness of the present moment through all of our senses and noticing more, you find out there's what does. No problem. And that deepens the self-awareness and the self-reflective capacity that we're going to talk more about. So how do you practice mindfulness? You can do it anytime, any place, for free. You can do it sitting down, you can do it lying down, you can do it standing up, you can do it walking, you can do it eating, you can do it pretty much anywhere you can bring your attention to your present moment experience, whatever that is. So, want to give it a try?
Yeah.
All right, let's try, let's begin with awareness of breath. So sort of the classic fundamental, foundational mindfulness meditation practice. And I'll only run this for a few minutes. We're not going to get into a serious meditative state, but just so you get the experience of feeling how it goes. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to get comfortable in your chair. Sit in an upright and dignified, back off the chair so that your spine is supporting you. Feet firmly on the floor. And gently close your eyes. Just notice your body sitting in your chair. Feel the weight of your body as it's sitting on the seat. Your feet on the floor. Relaxing your shoulders. Relaxing your head. Keeping your head upright, but dignified, but not stiff. Drawing your attention now gently to your breathing. Just notice your breath and where you may feel it in your body. You may notice your breath, particularly in your nostrils. Notice how that feels, breathing in your nostrils. You may notice your breathing in the back of your throat. If that's so, notice how that feels. Observing your breath in your chest and abdomen. Notice how your chest expands and contracts with your inhale and your exhale. If it helps to become aware of your breathing in your body, feel free to put your hand gently on your belly and notice how your belly expands and contracts with your breath. If at any time you notice that your mind has started to wander, that's not a problem. That's absolutely perfectly normal. It's what our minds do naturally. Just notice that your mind has wandered. Don't follow that train of thought. Just gently bring your attention back to your breath. Do this every time your mind wanders. Bring it back to the anchor of your breath. Sometimes people feel it helpful to keep the focus on the breath by counting their breaths. feel free, if it helps, to count 1 on the inhale, 2 on the exhale, 3 on the inhale, 4 on the exhale, and so on up to 10. And when you reach 10, go back to 1. Repeat. If your mind wanders at any point while you're counting up to 10, before you get to 10, wander into a thought, to a physical sensation or emotion, just notice that your mind has wandered, and gently bring your attention back to the breath. Now, as we close this exercise, gently bring your attention back to your body, feeling your body and the weight of your body in your chair against your seat. Your back is against your seat, feet on the floor. Just feel centered in your body, and when it's comfortable, gently open your eyes. That's a foundational meditation practice. The training is not in controlling your breath. The training is in training your mind to keep coming back to a focus of intention over and over and over and over and over and over again, because that's what our minds will do with that one. And that's what they'll do out in life all the time. And developing the capacity to increase your focus and attention is one of the key skills, I think, that lawyers who are interested in mindfulness is one of the reasons that they're interested in it. It does increase the capacity for focused attention, to be in the moment, in the flow, where we're happiest. All right, benefits. I'm going to briefly go over these because I want to experiment with you all on testing out the science of this. But the benefits are based on science. I want to assure you that there have been a number of studies, and you can see how increasingly, in the early 80s and even through the 90s, very few studies on mindfulness. Even though John Kabat-Zinn back in the 70s, there has been an increase in attention. And notice in the last couple of years, this is the number of publications per year. So in 2017, there were 690, now 692 in the latest year. A huge increase in mindfulness studies across clinical journals as well as neuroscientific journals. Real big increase studying the benefits. Fortunately, you don't have to read all those, neither do I. I was sort of daunted when I first got involved with mindfulness because, oh my God, how am I going to sort through all of those studies? I don't have to because my colleague at Georgia Tech has done so. Paul Verhagen is a psychologist at Georgia Tech, and he's read all of them. And he tosses out 75%. The junk. Not good science. And for a variety of reasons, whether by design, whether by sample size, whether by all of the things. They're just not good studies. You have to be cautious when you're reading about the benefits of mindfulness as to what constitutes a good study. And we're now in the second generation, I think, of mindfulness studies where we actually have some good measures and good techniques. And the quality of the research is going to get better. But he has looked through the 20-25% that he thinks is good, particularly the meta-analysis of the studies that he says. And he says, look, mindfulness isn't a magic bullet, but it is a broad spectrum corrective to the psychological ailments of daily life. All right, so he's gone through and this is culling from his research, that there are good studies to show that mindfulness does reduce stress, and probably a correlative of that is that it boosts the immune function out here. It reduces anxiety and depression. It dampens those negative emotions that we have a natural negativity bias towards, particularly if we're lawyers. It amplifies positive emotions, helps regulate emotions. There's less rumination. The less looping of your mind probably also leads to less depression and less anxiety. Takes the edges off negative personality traits, and those of you who have read the Dan Harris, that was what Dan Harris's wife was particularly happy about when he started meditating. Strengthens self-concept. This is where we're becoming quite relevant to externship programs. Strengthens that self-awareness, that self-confidence, and offers the opportunity for more empathy and compassion. There are a huge variety of mindfulness meditation practices, some that deal with focused attention, like the breath awareness, some that deal with mind-body connection, enhancing the awareness of the body, some that deal with developing, training not just the mind and body awareness, but helping the heart to train in for compassion and empathy. But these benefits do all have scientific support in the clinical studies.
Can I ask
Yeah.
a question? Whenever I see that, I just worry or think, is it the nature of the people who come to it? Like, that's what I worry. It's like, you know, I mean, are people walking into the room who are like inclined to be that way and want to be that way, and they're using it to like work on that, or are we getting like the average law student-y person and it's like, whoa, this is a whole, you know, right? You know what I mean?
This is not scientific. I taught a class to 1Ls, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. And I included one session on meditation and mindfulness. As a tool, it was a wraparound spring break. So they were all going off into spring break pro bono placements. And we spent, it was a 3-hour, we met once a week. We spent about an hour and a half, 2 hours just talking about meditation, and then I taught them different techniques. And students who had never heard of it before, never thought about using it before, wrote me after the semester was done and said, I had never sat before, never like thought about it. I've used the sitting techniques and breathing techniques that you taught to calm myself before interviews, before situations. I was floored with that.
Yeah,
So it's not scientific.
and I don't have a scientific answer for you, Sue. They do worry about the scientific studies being a self-selected group. And usually the clinical studies anyway, not the ones that are based on MRIs and actual brain scans, it's self-reported, which itself has a bias. We offer mindfulness, 6 weeks of mindfulness training every fall, and it's completely voluntary. Though we do ask if you are going to sign up that you come to all 6 because they build on each other. I can't tell. We usually get about 80, 90 people signing up. After attrition, we have about 60 regular attendees. I can't tell. Are they self-selected, or are they willing to just, I've never done this, but man, I think I'm going to need it. I don't know. Like the clinical studies, the self-reports are incredibly positive. Can't tell you. We're going to talk about all these benefits that the ABA, or the Path to Well-Being Report cited for mindfulness. Now I want to get to the science. So 2 aspects One is the default mind. That is, I told you the default mind is a wandering mind. I'm going to explore that a little bit, and then I want to talk about stress reactivity, or our typical stress response. What's going on in the body, actually, when we start getting triggered in our environment, and why mindfulness can address those, how mindfulness can address that natural stress response. So the default mind is a wandering mind. There was a study by that name called The Default Mind is a Wandering Mind, and what they found was that mind wandering is frequent. 47% of the time we're off somewhere else than right here. That's nearly half. I find this study very interesting, so I'm going to share it with you. Don't get freaked out. They came to this conclusion by having people agree, like thousands of people, agree to have an app put on their phone, which would buzz them at random times during the day and ask 3 questions. 1, what are you doing right now? And their choices were all these things on the top half. Okay, were you sleeping? Yeah. Were you working on the computer, commuting, doing housework? There were about 22 activities: walking, talking, playing, having sex. You know, maybe these were your choices. All right. What are you doing? That's what they asked. And then they asked, you know, sort of, how are you feeling? Feeling happy? Feeling not happy? And they answered that question. Then they asked a 3rd question. Are you thinking about what you're doing, of all those things? And this is where they found this, that 53% of the people their minds weren't wandering, but that meant that the other 47% of people, their minds were wandering. Okay? And then they correlated with your mind wandering, correlated with that, how happy were you? What they found was people were less happy when their minds were wandering than when they were not. That is, when they were absorbed, and it didn't matter what they were doing. It could have been chores, it could have been commuting. If they were actually absorbed in what it was they were doing, they were happier than the folks who were maybe engaged, other than the making love. There's this footnote to that study that said that was treated differently. But otherwise, you know, if you weren't paying attention to whatever it was you were doing, tended to be mind wandering, less happy. So they concluded that the mind wandering is simply the brain's default mode of operation. And there's a large science on the default mode network in the brain. What's going on in the default mind, this wandering mind? We already talked about mental time travel. We're thinking about the past, thinking about the future, anything but the present. A lot of self-referential processing. That's the narrative story, the I, me, and mine. I'm the heroine in my story. You all are my supporting actors and actresses. Judgments, commentary. Do we think it's too cold? Do we think it's too hot? Do we like that movie? Do we not like this person? Do I like the dean? Do we not like the dean? You know? Whatever it is, doesn't matter. Do we like the furniture? Do we like this painting? Do we like it? Doesn't matter. Everything we've got an opinion about. We particularly make social comparisons. And that's really what drives a lot of folks crazy, particularly with social media, because that's nothing but social comparisons. People out there happier than I am, or smarter than I am. That's what our students are evaluating all the time. Where do I fit in this new hierarchy where I've come to the law school? Comparison, comparison, comparison. That's what's going on when they aren't paying attention. Okay? All these things are going on in our students when they aren't absorbed in their work, their play, their lives, their classrooms. That's what's going on in the default mind. What's not going on in the default mind? This is what the default mind kind of looks like. It's kind of a gentle blur over there. When we finally can focus, this is what it looks like. And we're happier when we're focused on whatever it is we're doing in the present moment. Let's talk about stress. One of my favorite topics. You're going for a walk. You see a grizzly bear. What's your reaction? All right.
Get between the mom and the cub.
Yeah, right. You do not want to just, you know, you don't want to go over pet, right? You're fear, right? Typically, flight or freeze. How about now? Seeing two bears or similar bears. Not afraid. Our minds can distinguish between real risks and non-real risks. They may take a moment to make that assessment. What do you say?
Is that a snake?
What?
I don't know, is that a snake? No,
Yeah. So sometimes it's a little hard. It's not actually one of these. It's sticks. But when we're out in the woods, as I am often with my husband, I can remember once we were walking along and both of us stopped frozen. Neither of us knew why. It's because we were having our visceral reaction before we had our mental reaction. And after we stood there frozen, we realized after we had heard it, that we had heard a rattle. And there was a rattlesnake. But until we could engage our brain in that, our body took over. What's your reaction to a piece of paper? Positive, negative? No reaction, right? How about if it said that? You'd have a reaction, right? Right? Our students are having reactions to these pieces of paper. By the way, that dogs aren't. But you're having an emotional reaction to different pieces of paper that otherwise you wouldn't have an emotional or psychological reaction to. And yet all of these kinds of stresses of life today are creating triggers for us, for our students, that are not dissimilar to the stress response that our ancestors had back in the day when there were real physical threats to survival. That is, we're primed for fight, flight, freeze. That's what we're primed to do. It's a great adaptive mechanism. Kept our ancestors alive so they could reproduce, and we're here today. Thank you very much, ancestors. Okay, the problem is, we don't live with the same physical threats, but our minds don't distinguish. That is, we treat the psychological and social threats, our minds and our bodies treat them the same way that we treat a snake, grizzly bear, in the wild, and that our ancestors did when they saw man-eating tigers. Our brains and our bodies react the same way. So, how stressed are you? On a scale of 1 to 10. I asked my students this, and just asked my negotiation students this week, and I had some raise their hand at a scale of, at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, scale of 10, some going all the way up to 10. Okay? They're stressed. This is the American Psychological Association's annual survey from 2015. That's the latest I could get it. This was the reported stress levels in the last month. Male, 4.9 on a scale of 10. Female, 5.3. What the students are particularly interested in, you may find interesting, is the average stress level by generation. Look at that, millennials. Most stressed, most self-reported stress. Let's be careful. I asked my students, why is that? You know, what, you got more to be worried about? Why is that?
More to be uncertain about.
Okay, so yes, more to be worried about, more things, more of those emotional and psychological stressors.
It's social media.
Social media, which creates more stresses, those social comparisons, judgments, inner critics, so on. Yeah? Anything else? Why does it go, why are the matures? The matures are older than the baby boomers. So, you know, I think they were 75 and older.
Well, perspective, age is perspective, so you just know some things will pass.
You've been there before, and that was a snake. And that wasn't a snake, it was a snake. You know? Now, that we're in the zoo. You've seen it before. And by the way, those memories are getting stored in your hippocampus. We're going to talk about that in biology. And you can access those more readily than younger folks who haven't had that amount of experience that gives them perspective to be able to distinguish, you know, between the real threats and the past two kinds of unpleasant events. Yeah.
Do you have thought on why the numbers are so different, that twice as many women answered the question as men? So you,
I know.
yeah, all right.
Where do you feel stress in your body? Anybody, just tell me where you feel it.
Shoulders.
You feel it in your shoulders. Okay, where else?
Stomach.
What?
Stomach.
Ooh, right, yeah. Stomach, where else? Okay, your head, yeah. That's right. Anyplace else? Forehead. Okay, you feel it in your forehead. Shoulders, neck. Anybody feel it in their back? Lots of people feel it in their back. I want to go through how the stress response works. And what happens if the stress response is chronically activated, what chronic stress does to the body, and where you feel it over time. So, basically, after some visual sensation comes in through your eyes, the hypothalamus, which is not listed here, the hippocampus that I referred to, that's where memory is stored, which allows you to distinguish the real from the non-real threats. The hypothalamus processes your visual sensations and starts sending messages to your prefrontal cortex, which is the area of the brain up here, which is the seat of executive decision-making and rational thought. It also sends signals to the amygdala, which is very deep in the limbic system, and that is the part of the brain that controls your automatic responses, your fight, flight, freeze, faint responses. Depending on the signals that the hypothalamus is giving to your amygdala and cortex, one may become dominant, but both the other. And when the amygdala becomes dominant, we get an emotional hijack. I ask my students, has anybody ever lost it? They all say, yeah, sure, we've lost it. I teach negotiation. There's kind of emotion running throughout all of our role plays. And why is that? What happens when the amygdala takes over, when we've kicked in our fear, our fight or flight, when we feel stressed, when we think it's a man-eating tiger, or the equivalent paper tiger in our lives today, the amygdala takes over and becomes dominant, and when the amygdala becomes dominant, it shuts down the prefrontal cortex. That's why it's so difficult to think rationally when you're in the midst of what we call an amygdala hijack. Once the amygdala starts getting truly activated, yes, it shuts down the prefrontal cortex. It also activates immediately the sympathetic nervous system down the spinal column. It begins the release of stress hormones. And I want you only to pay attention to this side, with the sympathetic nervous system, because we've got two. These are automatic. You don't much control them. You can a little bit. That's what mindfulness practice can do. But in the midst of an amygdala hijack, it's a little bit hard, because what's happening is all of these automatic fight or flight responses, the heart starts beating more rapidly, right? Our pulse rate goes up. We start shallow breathing. Some people start hyperventilating, but shallow breathing and airways start to open up in an effort to try to get more oxygen in. The liver starts producing glucose for energy because our body is now trying to get ready to flee or to fight, depending on, but it's all energy that's designed to make us ready to flee or fight. Well, the gut goes offline. We don't need it. If we're about to be eaten, we don't have to worry about eating. We need something else. All right. But this all happens in a minute. I mean, before you have it, and you don't have a control over it, that's what happens. Once that amygdala becomes dominant and sets off the sympathetic nervous system. What happens when it continually happens? When we don't have man-eating tigers, but we have the paper tigers that we, in every corner office, in every classroom, in every aspect of our lives, is triggering that response. Well, over time, our headaches become perpetual. We have very much problem with sleep, memory, emotional regulation. It goes to our skin. The stress response goes to our skin. We develop acne and rashes. Over time, that's all the tension in the body. Aches, neck, shoulders, back, jaw. The heart, all that, the heart pounding increases blood pressure and the risk of heart attacks. The lungs increase in inflammation, causing potential heart asthma attacks. The liver and pancreas, remember I told you, we really saw that glucose energy? Yeah, but all that, releasing that glucose and then insulin in order to counteract the glucose increases the risk of diabetes, stomach, nausea, heartburn, intestines, diarrhea, constipation, reproductive system, suppresses the reproductive system for both men and women, and overall, depresses the immune system, which lessens our ability to fight or recover from illness. So what do we do about it? We all go to the CVS, and aisle after aisle after aisle after aisle is designed to address each of those ailments.
Yes. So this is like terrifying, right? Because as I'm reading, I'm like, oh, I identify with all of those things, right? And I'm just sort of thinking about, it's very good, it's personal reflection, right? But I'm also thinking about like, if I was to talk to my students, right, about this, because many of them are incredibly stressed, right, as we all experience, I feel like it's sort of like the approach where it's like, I'm trying to scare them into doing this, right? Because if you don't, like, your body's going to physically fall apart, which sounds like that's actually maybe true. But I'm also sort of wondering how to overcome that. And I know that the other circles had other positive responses, right? Like to engaging in mindfulness. And you could perhaps, I guess, overemphasize those versus sort of this. But I don't know, I'm having a strong reaction to this, so I'm just sort of owning that and just like
I'm glad.
thinking about what my students
So I can tell you how this, I just gave this to my negotiation students, okay? In preparation for trying it out on you all, because it's relevant, because they're all stressed. And we get to this point, and time's up for the class. And they're like, well, aren't you going to tell us what to do about it? And the answer is yes, I am. You know, that's my next step. So I'm going to tell you what to do about it. All right, the students were incredibly, and to answer your question, engaged by this, and yes, I think terrified by it. You know, and I'm not doing this for them to teach them mindfulness. I only do that on a voluntary basis. I don't introduce it in my classes. Yet, though I am teaching professional responsibility to the mindful lawyer this summer, and we'll see how that goes, where it's, you know, a more mixed group. But my next step is going to talk to you about, so what do you do about it? Now that you understand how this works, what do we do about it? And why is it that zebras don't get ulcers?
How do we know
Zebras don't get ulcers?
Yeah.
How do we know that zebras don't get ulcers?
Zebras. Why is that?
They simply are allowed in life.
Yeah, right, well, they could die, you know, I mean, that's one. Mostly because they go back to rest and digest. They go back to grazing. That is, they move fast. It isn't for sure that lion's going to get that zebra. I mean, zebras are really, they're very fast. And even if they get scratched, they move on. And their flight stress response engages just like ours. Stress response works exactly the same way. Their livers produce glucose, their heart rate goes up, they start breathing faster, all in, to get their muscles ready to run. But they escape the lion and then they go back to grazing. The problem with us is that we never go back to grazing. We don't tend to spend much time triggering our rest and digest response. We're always putting the gas pedal on, the sympathetic nervous system, and rarely putting the brake on to trigger the parasympathetic nervous system. So, here's where we go. This is what you tell your students after you scare them to death, or almost. And I want us to think through this. What can you do to prevent amygdala hijack? Because, you don't really want to lose it in the middle of a core presentation or a negotiation or a class. How do you minimize it once it's started? And how do you return to baseline once you've been hijacked? What can you actually do? And I think understanding the stress response helps you to understand why these things, particularly those that mindfulness fosters, counteracts the natural human state. All right, the first step is prevention, and this is what I think is really important for externships. These students are going out into the real world, having to perform. They're kind of stressed, right, when they go out in their first externship and new work environment and all of that. What do you tell them to stay calm, keep cool? What do you do? What allows them to stay calm? This is what I nag incessantly my negotiation students about. Same advice. Anybody got an idea? How to prevent, in the workplace, the stress response from becoming activated?
Fully prepared.
Bingo. The more you prepare, the better off you are. It reduces fear and boosts self-confidence. If you go in prepared for whatever it is, preparation is one of the best ways to prevent the stress response from getting triggered. But we're mostly concerned, once it's triggered, now what do we do? And these are two themes, and we'll go through some exercises about how to counteract it. The first theme is you gotta step off the gas, okay? The gas is the sympathetic nervous system. And you've got to put on the brake. You have to allow time for the parasympathetic nervous system to engage. This is why taking slow, deep breaths starts to engage the parasympathetic nervous system, or our rest and digest. It's why it's relaxing. It's engaging the parasympathetic nervous system rather than the sympathetic nervous system, and mostly one only goes on or the other. Another key is you want to enhance the use of the prefrontal cortex. Now, remember I said amygdala hijack tends to shut down our rational thought. So we want to engage it. We want to make the prefrontal cortex dumb and to allow the amygdala a little bit of time to cool down so it's not triggering and flooding our body with all those stress hormones. We engage our prefrontal cortex first with the realization, I've just been triggered. I've just been triggered. Gives us time to reflect, analyze. Anything that we bring the analytical thinking to helps to calm the amygdala, and then we return to the problem. So, first thing you can do, and this is a phrase out of the alternative dispute resolution literature, check yourself before you wreck yourself. Okay, just give yourself time. Once you recognize you're triggered, just, or as they say, go to the balcony, try to get perspective. Time out. not jumping off.
That's what
Yeah,
I
Like, go there right away. Maybe I need a different balcony. Right? Go to the beach. So what I have to be looking at, or getting perspective here, all right? But this is allowing all those, so what happens when, so the pituitary gland in the brain is signaling stress hormones, but also once it starts going down the nervous system, down the spinal column, it's hitting those adrenal glands that are sitting on top of the kidneys, and that's pumping out adrenaline, epinephrine, and cortisol, classic stress response. Once they're in there, it takes a little while to get them out. You know, you can't say to somebody who's in the midst of an amygdala hijack, stop it. Or you can't. You're just not going to stop it. Right? It's just, so you got to give it time. All right, moving helps. And in mindfulness, we do a lot of mindful movements. In fact, I think it's probably a good time to stretch. What do you think? Everybody want to stand up just for a minute? Let's just stretch a little. See how that feels. I hope I haven't been stressing you out, except you in the back. I know I stressed you out. What you could have to do.
All of us on suicide prevention.
Yeah. All right, yeah, so let's lift up, stretch up to the ceiling, down. Breathe out. In. Out. One more. In. Out. All right, let's put your hands down by your side and let's just do some shoulder rolls. Roll your shoulders forward. Roll them back. Your neck to the other side. Back to the other side. Bring your head to the middle. Now roll your head around in a circle. Feel your neck relax. Roll your head other circle way. One more, let's bend over if you have room. Let's raise our and bend over as far as is comfortable. And up. One more. Move down. Okay, you can sit down. Feel better? All right, mindful movement, yoga, okay? So is a series of mindful movements. Intentionally, time to your breathing. This mindful movement here are the ones developed by Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Zen Buddhist who is very well known in mindfulness circles. And you can Google 10 mindful movements, and these are the movements. They're slow, they're gentle. Some are a little more challenging than they might like because they involve balance. But they're all ways to bring yourself back to center. These are things you can do, in the moment, to bring yourself back. And it works because it's engaging the parasympathetic nervous system. At the same time, it's dissipating those stress hormones.
Sherry, can I just?
Yeah.
So from a yoga perspective too,
Allison teaches yoga.
There's certain inversions, like shoulder stander, chest openers, where your neck is, your chest is towards your chin, where it does automatically engage the parasympathetic. I mean, some movement is agitating, but there are certain movements that engage the parasympathetic. And when we talk about yoga, we talk about restorative yoga. A lot of times people do yoga, but they do like frantic yoga, flow yoga, or really quick movements, and you can't work on the nervous system until the muscles and everything can release. And so sometimes holding the pose for longer can help you move to a different system of the body over time.
So what yoga was originally designed for was to allow the meditators to sit longer in meditation.
Oh.
That is, it was designed to increase both strength and flexibility for long hours of meditation. That's what it was. That's what its original purpose was. It was developed as a companion to the meditation process itself.
So, you guys, Allison, I just really want to promote Allison. She does externships at Penn State, and she really is a yoga instructor, like at this younger school. Like, she really, really is serious about it. So, like, you should talk to her, use her, know she's out there, and yeah, it's so cool. Like, so, thank you. Thanks.
Find a yoga studio where you don't have to dress up and find clothes, and, where you just actually is someone who's focused on breathing and the exercises. The more traditional, I think, the better. This aerobic exercise, necessarily, yoga. All right, how do we engage? What's a good way to engage the parasympathetic nervous system? Because that's what we want to do, right? We want to calm that down. We want to slow the heartbeat. We want to dissipate the stress hormones. We want to digest. We want to get that, the stomach and intestines back online, which they aren't when we're floating toppers.
It makes me think of biathlon athletes who go from, fastest can be cross-country skiing, and then they have to be steady enough to shoot a rifle incredibly accurately. And so they have to change their heart rate in a moment, right? Because you can't be a sharpshooter with that kind of heartbeat. And so it's my favorite point of the Olympics is to watch those guys and to think about that transition.
Well, we may never become.
Not me. I can't.
But what we can do is what we did at the very outset of this, is we can breathe, right? We can take some deep breaths, and that's what that 4-7-8 technique that we started out with will do. Deep breathing will help. We won't go as fast as they need it, but they probably do that.
I'm positive. Not knowing a single biathlon athlete.
So remember I said we need to engage the prefrontal cortex? Right, because sort of the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex are vying for dominance. And I think most of us, unless we do perceive that there is a man tiger out there, would prefer our prefrontal cortex activated more than our amygdala, right? Particularly because we're lawyers, so we make our livings. Our students are going to make their livings up here in our heads. So how do you engage the prefrontal cortex in the moment of an amygdala hijack?
Can I just,
Answer the question,
you
please.
remind me of Cortex, which is, so as I recall, but my biology night, that's the part of the brain which is your current knowledge that you're working with. It's not all of your memory and all of it
Right.
It's really where, like, all your processing.
Analytical, critical thinking skills are taking place. All those things we value.
And what we're
school.
using at the moment.
What we're using at the moment, yep. And so we want to take advantage of it right in the moment. And so the old advice is this will engage it, count to 10. If you're angry, count to 10. That counting engages the prefrontal cortex. If you're very angry, count to 100. Engage it even more. It may take a little while. Another one, and this comes out of the conflict resolution field. How do you deal with difficult or challenging people that are And particularly for mediators, you got somebody who's kind of being a pain in the neck and disrupting the mediation, what you can do is you can ask them to make a list. Doesn't matter, you can make a list of it. You know, just make a list. And all the things that you want out of, you know, the house after you split up, say, child custody. You know, just list. It doesn't matter what it is. List making is about the most calming of experiencing because it engages the prefrontal cortex. And you all and our students can do this ourselves, right? When you find yourself in the midst of an amygdala hijack because you're feeling overwhelmed with everything that you need to do, best thing you can do, just make a list. The very list-making process is a calming process. There is good science behind this, not just the clinical studies, which are the self-reports of how to feel now. Better. Actually, with long-time meditators, there is an increased volume of gray matter in the prefrontal cortex, and there is a decrease of volume of gray matter in the amygdala. Good, because meditation does affect the brain regions associated with things we want to enhance and the things we want to depress, like anxiety. So, quick body scan. Try that. One more. Okay. All right. If we're going to learn how to engage the parasympathetic, it's helpful to really get in tune with our bodies. In fact, the mind-body connection is what a lot of mindfulness meditation is about. So, take a moment here. Again, get comfortable in your seat. Upright position, dignified posture. We're just going to do a real quick scan of our body, see what's going on right now. Bless you. If it's comfortable, close your eyes. And just gently bring the focus of your attention to the top of your head. Scan down from the top of your head, across your forehead, across your face, across your scalp, your ears, and your jaw. Notice if there's any tension anywhere in your face, or your jaw, or your scalp. And if there is, just let it go. Drawing your attention gently to your neck and shoulders, noticing if there's any tightness there. If there is, gently let it go. Scanning down briefly down your arms, noticing what's there. If you're feeling your clothing, or feeling your hands against your legs, or your chair, or desktop. Notice what may be feeling in your arms and your hands and fingers. Drawing your attention to the front of your chest. See what you notice going on in the front of your chest. Your attention to your hips, feel the weight of your body on the chair. Notice anything in your hip area, in the pelvic region. And scanning down through your thighs, drawing your attention to your thighs. What you may feel there, maybe clothing, it may be pressure against the seat of your chair. Down your knees, calves, ankles, feet. Feel the weight of your feet on the floor, in your shoes, your socks, whatever you found on your feet. Whatever your feet may be feeling, or if they're not feeling anything at all, that's fine too. Now expanding your awareness just briefly before we close this meditation to the your awareness of what's going on in this room. Any sounds you may be perceiving, any light sensations you may be feeling, any temperature changes. Just notice, don't react to them, just notice what you're feeling and you're sensing in your surroundings. And when it's comfortable, gently open your eyes. The body scan is another very foundational mindfulness meditation practice that really opens up. It's particularly important, I think, for law students and lawyers generally, because most of our lives we pay no attention to our bodies. I mean, not really. Maybe how it looks, but not really to what's going on in your body. And our bodies are the first repository of our emotions. And we can learn so much about ourselves in terms of enhancing our self-awareness, our students' self-awareness and self-reflective capacity by beginning to appreciate what's going on in the body. All right, so I'm going to close this out. The relevance of all of this for externship programs. The first is really, the issue of promoting mental and physical well-being, and that's what the path to lawyer well-being is all about, right? And I hope you have some now understanding as to why mindfulness, these practices do help to promote physical and mental well-being, because they enhance our ability to remain calm, to forestall the stress response in the first place, but once even if they are engaged, to hasten our recovery to baseline. This, over time, if mindfulness is developed as a habit, really can lessen the bodily damage from those chronic stress responses. Second, peak performance. This is what the path to lawyer well-being and the ABA were particularly concerned about, was fostering key lawyer competencies, increasing focus and attention, those critical cognitive skills, the ability to engage in rational and ethical decision-making, developing resilience, okay, so that we improve our performance as lawyers, reducing ruminations. This is all within the path to lawyer well-being as to what are the things that are fostered by mindfulness. This is what I think is so critically important for our students. Cultivating the awareness of our thoughts, our feelings, and our body sensations really make us less reactive to all those stressors, all those paper tigers out there that we're interpreting as actual tigers. And in giving us that short pause before we react, we can now choose a response to have. And finally, the development of professional identity formation. This is what got me into mindfulness, because I was interested in how to increase our students' capacity for self-awareness and self-reflection. I thought mindfulness might be a route into that. And it does indeed help to develop empathy and compassion, very good for client counseling, ethics and professional behavior, and the development of identity. It increases our ability to become aware of our own biases, of the stuff that we're doing that's getting in the way of our being effective lawyers. We get to really tap into what is important to us, and so we can deal with resources, our inner resources, to deal with all the stresses that are going to come our way. I don't have time to give you all these short exercises. Happy to share them. I just want to mention in closing is that I really do think it's important that, however, whether mindfulness or not, whatever we do as faculty, as teachers, as students, we have to be a role model for what the things that we think are important. And if we think that it is important to take care of oneself physically and mentally, and if we do think it is important to develop the self-reflective capacity, based on serious self-awareness, then we have to model that. And mindfulness is a way that faculty can develop these same capacities. I've certainly noticed that in my life. And it helps to convey it to students if you can sort of, as you practice with the bridge. That's my final comment. Thank you all for coming.
It's like 15 in 2 weeks, and I was thinking it would be cool to do the breathing before we have that.
There you go.